Welcome to the adventures of the monad. Some cultures deal with death better than others, but in all cases, it is a mysterious process shrouded in superstition. Considering it is the only event in our life that we are certain to experience, it is worth looking at this transition from an esoteric perspective. At death, the consciousness withdraws from the dense physical body into the etheric envelope for a short period, usually a few hours, and then passes into the emotional body. Death thus consists of a process of unrobing or unsheathing. The monad, the immortal part of the person, shakes off from itself, one after the other, its outer casings, first the dense physical, then the etheric double, then even the emotional body, as we shall see later. In almost every case, the actual passing away appears to be perfectly painless, even after a long illness involving terrible suffering. The peaceful look on the face of the dead is substantial evidence in favor of this statement, and it is also borne out by the direct testimony of most of those who have been questioned on the point immediately after death. There are also testimonies from those who have gone through the portal only to find that their time has not come, and then come back and relate their experiences to us. According to Arthur Powell, at the actual moment of death, even when death is sudden, a person sees the whole of their past life marshaled before them in its minutest detail. In a moment, the monad sees the whole chain of causes which have been at work during its life. It sees and now understands itself as it is, unadorned by flattery or self-deception. The departing monad reads their life, remaining as a spectator looking down upon the arena that they are quitting. This version of events is slightly at variance from other authors, including Lee Bladden. Why I think Powell's simplistic rendition is inaccurate is because some deceased individuals are not aware of the fact and wander the etheric plane as ghosts. Clearly, no recollection is occurring here. Others find themselves on the lower emotional planes, surrounded and tormented by their own negative emotions. In my opinion, what is correct is that the monad will, at some point, will be confronted by the events of the incarnation they have just departed. They will experience the events of their recent life in reverse order, moving back from death to their birth. At the same time, what they experience is through the lens of those they interacted with. Ponder that the next time you upset someone. The condition of consciousness immediately after the moment of death is usually a dreamy and peaceful one. There will also be a certain period of unconsciousness, which may last only for a few moments, though often it is a few minutes or several hours, and sometimes even days and weeks. The natural attraction between the emotional counterpart and the physical body is such that after death, the emotional counterpart, from force of habit, retains its accustomed form. Consequently, a person's physical appearance will remain unchanged after death. However, older souls may have a memory of and a preference for another representation of themselves that they present on the emotional plane. Because that emotional matter is very readily molded by thought, a person who habitually thinks of themselves after death as younger than they actually were at the time of death will probably assume a somewhat younger appearance. It is interesting to note that Sanat Kumara is often called the youth of 16 years. Very soon after death, in most cases, a significant change occurs in the structure of the emotional body, owing to the actions of the desire elemental essences, collectively known as the desire elemental. The emotional body comprises a sac made from tertiary matter, encasing elemental essences. This essence is living, though not intelligent, composed of secondary matter. Residing in the envelope, these essences are cut off from the general mass of emotional essences. Blindly, instinctively, and without reason, these essences seek their own ends and show great ingenuity in obtaining their desires and furthering their evolution. Evolution for secondary matter is a descent into tertiary matter. It aims to become, eventually, a mineral monad, thus passing through a tertiary phase. Therefore, the desire elemental's objective in life is to get as near the physical plane as possible and experience as many coarser vibrations as possible. It neither does nor could it know anything of the monad whose emotional body it is for the time being living. It desires to preserve its separate life and feels it can do so by utilizing its connection with the monad. It is conscious of its lower mind. It realizes that the more mental matter it can entangle with itself, the longer it will be able to retain its emotional life. On the death of the physical body, knowing that the term of its separate life is limited and that the monad's emotional death will more or less quickly follow, to make the monad's emotional body last as long as possible, it rearranges its elemental matter into concentric rings or shells, the coarsest shells being outermost. From the point of view of the desire elemental, it is a good policy because the coarsest matter can hold together longest and best withstand friction. It is also worth noting that we are talking about this elemental or desire elemental as though it is an entity. It isn't, but somehow it seems to act in a coordinated manner. That coordination is overseen by the nature spirits. And this is where you can think of the actions of the elemental essences as being somehow semi-intelligent. They themselves are not intelligent at all, but there is this instinctiveness that they have that comes from these nature spirits and the job they do to evolve the elemental essences. The rearranged emotional body is called the yatana, or suffering body. In the case of a very evil person, in whose emotional body there is a preponderance of the coarsest matter, it is called the dhruvan, or strong body. The rearrangement of the emotional body takes place over the surface of the counterpart of the physical body, not over the surface of the ovoid which surrounds it. The effect prevents the free and total circulation of emotional matter, which usually occurs in the emotional body. In addition, the monad can respond only to those vibrations received by the outermost layer of the emotional body. The body is thus shut up, as it were, in a box of emotional matter, being able to see and hear things of the lowest and coarsest plane only. This is hell, a hell created by us, not by a vengeful God. Although living amid high influences and beautiful thought forms, the evil monad would be almost entirely unconscious of their existence because the particles of their emotional body, which could respond to those vibrations, are shut in where they cannot be reached. Consequently, being able to sense only the coarsest matter in the emotional bodies of other people and being entirely unconscious of their limitations, they would assume that the monad they were looking at possessed only the unsatisfactory characteristics they would be able to perceive. Since they can see and feel only what is lowest and coarsest, the monads around them appear to be monsters of vice. Under these circumstances, it is little wonder that this tortured monad considers the emotional world hell. The rearrangement of the emotional body by the desire elemental does not affect the recognizability of the form within the ovoid. However, the natural change that takes place makes the form grow somewhat fainter and more spiritual in appearance as time passes, for reasons which will presently be made clear. Over time, the outermost shell or ring disintegrates. The discarnate monad then becomes able to respond to the vibrations of the next higher level of the emotional plane and thus rises to the next subplane, and so on from one subplane to another. Their stay on each subplane will correspond to the amount and activity of the matter in their emotional body belonging to that subplane. When we speak of a monad rising from one subplane to another, they need not necessarily move in space. Instead, they transfer their consciousness from one level to another. In the case of a monad with a rearranged emotional body, the focus of their consciousness shifts from the outer shell to the one next to it. The monad thus gradually becomes unresponsive to the vibrations of the one order of matter and answers instead to those of the higher order. Therefore, one world with its scenery and inhabitants would seem to slowly fade away from their view, while another world would dawn upon them. As the shell usually disintegrates gradually, the monad finds the counterparts of physical objects growing dimmer and dimmer, while thought forms become more vivid. Suppose that during this time they meet other monads at intervals. In that case, they will imagine that the monad's character is steadily improving because they can appreciate the higher vibrations of that character. The rearrangement of the emotional body, in fact, constantly interferes with a monad's accurate and complete vision of their friends at all stages of their emotional life. This process of rearrangement of the emotional body, which takes place in most people, can be prevented by the person setting their will to oppose it. Anyone who understands the conditions of the emotional plane should completely stop the rearrangement of the emotional body by the desire elemental. The particles of the emotional body will then be kept intermingled, as in life, and in consequence, instead of being confined to one emotional subplane at a time, the monad will be free of all the subplanes, alighting on the subplane that is the average density of all the emotional matter in their emotional envelope. Remember this hack. It will save you a lot of grief. The elementals, being afraid in their curious semi-conscious way, will endeavor to transfer their fear to the monad, which is jolting them out of the rearrangement to deter the monad from doing so. Hence, one reason why it is so valuable to know these matters before death. Suppose the rearrangement or shelling has already occurred. In that case, it is still possible for someone who wishes to help the monad break up the condition and, in this way, set them free to work on the whole emotional plane, up to the highest level they are objectively conscious, instead of being confined to one level. The next topic is to look at life after death and the principles involved. Thank you.